Hi, welcome to this panel. Today we are going to be talking about queer and trans survivorship and the uniqueness of approaching this topic from the different perspectives that we're bringing you. My name is Aredvi Azad, and I am the Director of Education and Programs at the HEAL Project. The HEAL Project is an educational initiative working to prevent and end childhood sexual abuse through healing the wounds of sexual oppression and embracing sexual liberation. And I'm going to have Erica introduce themselves.
Hi, my name is Erica Perez. I use any pronouns. I'm the Community Awareness Associate for the Network LARED. And the Network LARED is a social justice survivor-led organization that's working to end partner abuse, or as some folks know it, domestic violence in the lesbian, gay, bisexual, queer, trans, polyamorous, and kink communities. Thanks, Aredvi.
Hi, and I am Ignacio Rivera, and I am the founder and executive director of the HEAL Project. And I'm happy to be here on this panel.
Yeah, thank you. What I love about this panel is that we all are working with survivor-led organizations, and that we have a strong focus on queer trans. Network LARED is exclusively queer trans focused. So I'm very curious about knowing more about the kind of work that you do and how you see the perspective that you bring into queer trans survivorship in your work.
Yeah, Redby. I think we try to focus, or we try to approach the work we do like in a very survivor-led, survivor-centered kind of approach. So one of the things that we really value about our organization is that survivors are involved in all parts of our work. So they're volunteers, they're staff members, they're board members as well. And that's because we really try to hold on tight to the belief that survivors are partner abuse. Survivors in general are experts, in their own experiences. And so we want to make sure that we're following their lead through our services, through our education, our trainings, our outreach, all of those aspects. And another thing that I think also kind of is unique about the work that we do is that we don't require survivors to want to leave an abusive partner or to have left a relationship where abuse is happening in order to receive services from us, in order to volunteer with us, or in order to be staff members. And that's because, if we were to do that, if we were to put that as a requirement, it would just be another way of someone else taking away power and agency over a survivor and dictating what is best, and what they should be doing. So we know that doesn't work, right? It's just replicating, abusive patterns that an abuser can use.
Yeah, thank you for that. I can say that on our part, being a survivor-led initiative, there is a unique perspective that we bring from our own experiences. But also, as we sometimes talk about this, I want to challenge the idea of having survivor services always be survivor-led, because I feel like sometimes we can put a lot on survivors, especially queer trans survivors, right? There's so much that you already have to deal with. And on top of that, it's great to have survivor-led initiatives happening more, but I want to really encourage everyone to take an interest in this topic, because we never know, when things can happen to us. You may not be identifying as a survivor today, but someone you love might be, or something might happen to you in the future. So being part of that cycle of ending violence in any capacity, I think is something that anybody can connect to.
Yeah, thank you for saying that, Aredvi. And thank you, Erica. I really like what you said about Network LARED, not denying someone services because they are still in that kind of abusive relationship. And that's so important. I think that's really important because that's a harm reduction approach. That is meeting people where they're at. And we absolutely have to do that. We can't create another structure that's going to, oppress them more. And we believe that as well at the HEAL Project, really meeting people where they're at in their survivorship, in their learning, in their parenting, because we do all of all of those things. And I think that a lot of people, I think this is the uniqueness of being, well, you know, there's a lot of things, people of color, people at the margins, and doing this kind of work for other people at the margins, that it is, one, it's great to have that experience to share. And I agree, Aredvi, like when people have that desire and drive and want that, to lead because of experience is beautiful, because I think leading from that really opens up a lot of avenues for people when they're looking for someone that experienced something just like them, like they truly understand. And at the same time, yes, if it's only focused on, this should only be led by survivors, then we're putting survivors in a position where they have to hold so much more than they need to. So I think it's a great opening to be there for the work to teach, to mentor, if that is what is desired. And if it's not, just to freaking help people that they need the resources, right? I think it's both really, really important. So thank you both for bringing up that perspective.
Yeah, I actually really love to be talking more about, you know, the cycle of sexual violence and what comes up in that, because in my own experience and also personally and professionally, being in abusive relationships, suffering sexual abuse, whether it was in the past or happening at the moment, can be a really isolating relationship, an isolating experience without even being queer or trans or a person of color, which are already isolating experiences in and of themselves. So talking about how, again, yeah, I really appreciate understanding the context in which not everybody can afford to be leaving every abusive situation, and thinking about abuse as something that's, and trauma, something that's much larger than just the immediate relationships you are in. There are communities involved sometimes in this. There's the structure, the systems of oppressions we are in. There's just so many layers we have to work through, and always distancing ourselves from anything that is toxic is not an option for a lot of people, especially the more marginalized you are. So I want to hear more about issues, a little bit getting into the details of it. So I understand sexual violence, intimate partner violence, as a lot of problems around consent, boundaries, toxic behaviors. So I'm curious, what is your approach, Erica, the network led around doing this kind of work with people who come to you and having those conversations?
Yeah, I think one thing that y'all's work, the work of the HEAL Project, and the work that we do at the Network Red, and the ways that we look at like sexual violence and child sexual abuse and partner abuse, I think one thing we all have that it has in common is that these are non-consensual acts, right? These are acts that are done against a person, acts of harm and violence against a person, like without their consent. So when folks, like when survivors come to us, we have to do a lot of work around that, I feel like. There's a lot of guilt that is placed on survivors who are made to believe, like, you know, like if they hadn't done something, you know, then their partner wouldn't have reacted in that way, you know, and that's also part of the cycle of abuse that folks go through, right? An abusive partner manipulates, you know, certain aspects of a survivor's lives, says things like, you know, if you had just listened to me, if you had not talked to your friend, if you had stayed away from this person like I told you to, like you wouldn't be going through this. So there's a lot of work that we have to do around that, you know, having conversations about, you know, you didn't consent to abuse. No one consents to abuse, you know, and that's not something for you to own. And of course we do that following, like, you know, where a survivor's at, right? Because we also don't want to tell them how they should feel about their own experiences too. So doing a little bit of work around that. And I know this might be a bit tangential, you know, but when y'all talk about sexual violence, I also think about the sexual abuse that goes on, like within the context of a relationship where abuse is happening. And I think one of the other barriers that we hear often impacting queer and trans communities is that sexual abuse or sexual violence doesn't happen in our communities. which is not true, right? Because anyone can be a survivor. And I think that also has the effect of a survivor feeling like questioning themselves, like minimizing their own experience, being like, was that actually like assault? Was that actually rape? You know, if I'm taught that women can't be raped or women can't rape, you know, it was that rape, then was that sexual assault? If I'm taught that men can be raped, you know, was that my experience? So those are some of the things that we also see too.
Oh, you brought up a lot of good stuff. I was just taking a lot of notes because I was like, oh, yes. Yes, I see that thread as, yes, that non-consensual thread, also power. And if the abuse is, has sex involved, which almost always has, if you're in a relationship, then there's sexual abuse and emotional or financial and all the other ways that someone can be abused. And there is the non-consensual piece, is the guilt piece for sure. You know, like when we think about children who are being sexually abused, sexually assaulted and raped, and I just want to bring that out because we often don't talk about the rape of children. We're so scared to talk about it, and children get raped. And so when we think about that, we think about the guilt, we think about the grooming. So it is a different age range here, but they're kind of using the same freaking tools to dominate and control, you know, and to isolate, dominate, control, and isolate. Those are the tools right there. And I see a very clear connection in those behaviors and then possible outcomes of those behaviors for the, you know, the harm doer and for the survivor. So it doesn't serve anybody. It's just a huge thing. So, and then when you talked about, you know, like this doesn't happen in our community, that's so connected to like how we talk about when trauma happens in communities that are already so rampant with oppression and, you know, discrimination, because we want to survive. And so it's like, if this thing is happening, it's like, we can't say this thing is happening in our community, because and then it will just add to the idea that we're all broken and messed up and we can't do anything and we shouldn't have children and all of the things that people say, well, if you live this life, if you've had this experience, then this is what's going to happen. Or they say like, so we can't have this in our family. We have to hide it. So even if you're not the harm doer, you're implicit in the harm because you're hiding it and you don't want to talk about it. And so I see this happening in POC communities. I see this happening in LGBTQI communities. You know, like anytime a community has struggled to be visible, once you're there, it's like you can't go backwards. And so it just completely screws us up even more because we're engaging in this very same isolation. Yeah, and thank you for saying the piece about like this idea that women can't rape. My abuser was a girl, a woman. One of them was, and this has been like a huge piece of my work to be seen as a survivor. That this is, you know, Aredvi and I talk a lot about good survivors and bad survivors, and I'm sure there's some communication there about, you know, people in intimate partner and domestic violence situations, because people have ideas about these people, like, oh, that person, why didn't they call the cops? Why didn't they do this? Why didn't they do that? It's all blaming the person, you know, and it's like we get put all that stuff gets put on us, right? And so the idea that women can't rape really just goes back to the bigger idea that I think that the HEAL Project always talks about. We talk about sexual liberation, but when we talk about sexual liberation, we want to expand that idea, because usually when we say sexual liberation, I think people think of, you know, like naked white people running around in the woods having sex with each other, and that's just like totally liberation because that's what the media has fed to us about what liberation could look like. And so when we think about sexual liberation, it is every single part that goes into creating a person that is actually can sustain their emotions and communicate and express and hold. But pretty much, like when we talk about sexual liberation, those are the foundations that actually hold up how you can be an actual adult in a relationship, whether that's friendship, kinship, lovership, or any of that. And so that idea goes back to gender roles and how women and men are in this world that completely is a disservice to the work that you do, Erica, because and then it's like how I worked in DV in the LGBT community about 20 years ago, and it was convincing people that domestic violence actually happened, you know? And so it's interesting, like all of the oppressions really just continue to tie in, and even in the work that we're trying to do continues to pull that down. So it's like a constant effort of trying to stop it.
Yeah, what a wonderful conversation here. I can't even take notes anymore because there's so many wonderful topics. I think what I'm thinking about is how queer trans identity themselves for so long have been connected to being a survivor of sexual violence, right? We've been told for so long, oh, if you just healed from, you must have been, first of all, sexually abused, that's why you're queer or trans. And then if you just heal yourself from that experience, then you will suddenly realize you're straight and you're cis. So that adds another layer to the difficulty even talking about, like Ignacio, you were saying, talking about, no, like I'm not trying to heal from who I am. That's a different thing. There's plenty of straight people, cis people who are also victims of survivors of sexual violence, intimate partner violence. So yeah, what I also, another thing that unfortunately, these ideas are so ingrained that I can say for myself, what's been really difficult over the years, how long it took me to understand, to get my own head out of that hierarchy of what kind of violence is more deserving or I need to be paying more attention to. I am a survivor of rape by a cis man, and also a survivor of sexual assaults by my ex-girlfriend. And one of them involved, you know, a typical, like what you consider rape. And the other one was a different kind of abuse. It did not involve a penis. And it took me many years to identify both of those experiences as sexual violence, but even in my own head and in talking to so many people around, I always thought I had to react more to the experience with the cis man more than that one, even though in reality my own experience has been that because the rape was non-violent, it was with someone I already knew before, and that it was a one-time thing that was violent, it wasn't built upon a sustained thing, and other reasons. I actually, even though it was really shitty, it's terrible, it goes nowhere near the experience I had with within that relationship that was abusive relationship and sexual abuse happened in a queer relationship. That is my top sexual trauma. But it took me so long to even detach myself from that hierarchy because we think, oh no, anytime rape is happening in that straight way, that is the most harmful to everyone, regardless of context and anything around it. So I really appreciate you bringing up just how, you know, these ideas have a history and they continue to just, we carry them with us, despite even, you know, wanting to fight them. There's just so much force behind it constantly. Mm-hmm.
Could I add something actually?
Of course, yeah.
Y'all are bringing up so many great things, honestly, and I'm really happy that we're having these conversations. I think there are conversations that we have amongst like maybe like a predominantly cis straight like audience, right? Like the superficial conversations, the conversations of I'm trying to get you to see me as a survivor, get you to understand that this happens in our communities. And what y'all are bringing up is like the complexities of like having these conversations within our communities. Like Ignacio, what you said about, you know, when sexual abuse, child sexual abuse, child rape happens like in POC communities, in queer communities, you know, how do we talk about that? You know, how do we talk about that like in a wider stage if we don't want like white cis straight folks to see us as, like you said, damaged, broken people who are less than, you know, like that just like hit me really hard. That's not a conversation that I can have, you know, with like, unless it's an in-group conversation, right? You know, that's like a very like, yeah, I just want to appreciate you for like bringing that up. And also you, Aredvi, talking about how there's this misconception that somehow, you know, if you're a survivor of sexual abuse, then you must be confused about your gender or your sexual orientation, and that's where that stems from, you know. And it's so like hard to piece apart that argument, you know, in a succinct like way when folks bring that up, you know. And what happens if, you know, you are a survivor of like sexual assault or sexual violence and you do question your gender, you know, those don't have to be like tied together, those could be separate. So I just want to say I appreciate both of y'all for those points.
I am loving this conversation. Thank you, Erica. I want to go back to, this thing about, you know, not in our community. And it makes me think of Aisha's book, you know, Love with Accountability, Aisha Simmons. She has an anthology that, and it's all people of the Black diaspora speaking on or writing on being survivors, and the role of love in telling or not telling, right? So like a lot of families, you know, like sometimes if you love our family and you want no one to know what's happening here, then don't tell anyone. You know, if you care about me, you won't. So we speak on what it is to, like, you know, push those things down and how we need to change that. And you know, for me, it's like such a simple answer when we say, how do we talk about it? We talk about it. That's the answer. We talk about it, because once we bring something to the forefront and one person talks about the thing that other people were scared shitless to talk about, that gives permission for the next person to be like, oh, I can do this. It's another person right there that I can talk to about it. And then you keep on, because the more you hide it, the bigger and more corrupt and horrible it is. And when you talk about it, you know, it's so simple, because I remember in high school, this was something that always stuck in my mind. This girl that I knew who was a badass, and I really liked her. Like, nobody messed with her, and I really liked hanging out with her. And one day she came to school, and she wasn't there one day, and I was like, oh, what happened? Why were you absent? And she was like, oh, I got into a fight yesterday. And I was like, what happened? She was like, I got my ass beat. And I always remember how refreshing, it was just funny, how refreshing this really tough girl that everybody was scared of could admit that she had a fight and she lost. And then I was like, it just blew me away, you know, because most people lie. They're like, yeah, I had this fight and I fucked that person up, you know, and it's like this idea of honesty, even when it doesn't serve you or you're embarrassed, really changes things. Because I was like, wow, she made herself really vulnerable and said she got beat up. And then that doesn't make me so scared to talk about when somebody did something and I was scared to do something, you know? So it opened up an avenue. So I think just talking about things, and you don't have to have a formula, just talking about it, right? And then I want to bring up the idea of the cis male penis in this whole conversation, because it's just like the cis penis is constantly there. It's the thing that takes away the reality that women do rape, that you do not have to have a penis to rape, that castration does not eliminate rape, that you know, there's so many things attached to the penis that we overlook, and it really is, again, connected to all of the things that I talk about in terms of like talking about sexuality as a whole and gender, really breaking that open. Because if we had a different way, if we really had a different system of seeing letting our genders and our sexual orientations evolve naturally with nothing, oh, that's a world I want to live in. That is definitely a world I want to be in, because that would be a really beautiful, curious world, you know, just to see what happens, right? But we live in such a way that even in this structured way, we say men rape, women are survivors, period. And that is strong, because as a gender fluid person who has been doing this work for 20 goddamn years, 2 years ago, I went through a really difficult time and I was having suicidal ideation. It was really rough and I needed to get help. And I was like, as the person who is the helper of people, I am coaching people, I am helping them through their sexual lives, I need help. Where do I go? And I went to a support group that was for survivors, and it wasn't explicitly for women, but all of the people in it were cis women. And I went, did an intake and everything, and they straight up denied me. They said I could not be a part of the group because I would make the women uncomfortable. And so that broke my heart, because I was like, my life is about helping and healing and educating around this thing. And right now I need some support. And because of my gender expression, because the penis is the raper and the vagina is the receiver of rape, you know, or that in this case, well, it doesn't really matter if you don't have a penis. It's implied that you have a penis because you look like it. So we're not really talking about your gender here. We're just looking at you and seeing a man. You might look like a gay man, but you're a man no less. And you're a threat because you have a penis. And this is the same fucking conversation or argument that we have with trans women who do not, cannot, and you know, want to have surgery, you know, bottom surgery. And it's like the penis is present, danger, you know, and it's our ideas again about relationships, sexual orientation, gender, and I keep thinking that that's the way we connect with one another as human beings really is the key to shifting a lot of the ways in which we even handle trauma, you know, talk about it, connect with other people, even when to go get help. Man, as people of color, as queer people, why don't we ask for help? Because it is fucking hard, right? It's like, I don't want to put a burden on the other person that's going through the same thing or more. And it's really trying to step outside of that, step outside of the deep oppression that a lot of us are in, and really finding connection with other people, and relearning. It's all about relearning. Aredvi and I talk about this all the time. It's like we have to like throw everything out and just rebuild the stuff because we just live in a really messed up system.
Thank you, Ignacio. Absolutely, I agree with everything you said. You know, what's interesting is we know that most cases of sexual violence at any age, they happen, they're domestic cases. They happen by people we already know. They're in our lives. And so that connection between sexual violence and domestic violence, intimate partner violence, that is something that the HEAL project really focuses on, because then it becomes about relationships, right? And how we show up in relationships, how we're building relationships. And I think the theme I'm seeing here is a lot around that shame and that guilt of having to, first of all, admit to yourself something terrible is happening to you. It's a lot of, especially if you already are a survivor, having to admit that you don't have control over what's happening to you, something terrible happening to you, it's a lot. It's really a lot for anyone. Like Ignacio mentioned, even as people who've been doing this work for a long time, every time it happens, it's jarring. It's really jarring. And it's like, oh, but it shouldn't be happening to me. I'm the one who's like been helping others about this. How can this happen to me? But it's a lot. And I really want to just say that anyone who comes to the place of having the courage, like the girl in high school, to be like, yeah, like I was defeated. This terrible thing happened to me. It wasn't my fault, but it happened to me. I had that experience. Unfortunately, I feel like so much of going to relationships, queer trans relationships, so much of our relationships by default become isolating relationships. Unless we are the few lucky ones part of a large queer trans community, most of us find there's already a sense of a scarcity in our communities for finding love, romance, partnership, companionship, even friendship. And so when bonding happens, we are so attached to it. There's like extra pressure to want to keep it together. And so instead of, from the very beginning, allowing ourselves to go through a boundary setting process that works for us, go through a conflict resolution process that works for us, we kind of feel like, and this is a larger notion around how relationships are built. It's not unique to queer trans community, but it's especially, I feel like there's pressure to want to make this work at any cost. And so, and again, a lot of people even we know around us, right, they themselves are going through so much. So picking up the phone and calling a friend and be like, hey, this thing is happening. What do you think? is this fucked up or is it me, right? It's like those moments, so many moments that's happened to myself. I'm like, first of all, why don't I have the answer myself? It's like, if a friend asked me that, I probably have the answer right away for them. But it's happening to myself, and I'm questioning myself. You know, am I being gaslit, or am I being too sensitive? It's like, those are the moments I feel like a lot of survivors, and first of all, a lot of queer trans people in general deal with, right? It's because we deal with so much microaggression. You always are going around in the world and people treat you a certain way and you're questioning yourself. Is it me? Did I look too queer? Or were they threatened by me, by how I look? Or, you know, were they just, you know, they had their own issues. So it's like we bring that also into the relationship. So I really appreciate both of you talking about all of these connections and the complicated feelings that come up in these situations. So I also seeing a thread around the kind of support, like how can we actually get there with the support, both in terms of community, but also organizational, systematic support? What are the challenges around it? And what are kind of the ideas that you all have come up with in your work or would like to see happen?
Do you want to go first, Ignacio?
All right. So I always bring up this concept of community healing. Community healing is vital. I think that it is absolutely vital. I don't think healing could happen in and of itself. We don't live in a vacuum, so our healing can't happen in a vacuum. There can be individual stuff that happens by yourself, but you have to be connected to other people. And that's either your best friends, support groups, family, whoever. That I tell that to everyone that I coach. I was like, if you have one friend, but hopefully two, even better, so you won't, you know, put too much pressure on one friend, but two people that you can build trust with, build something with, create boundaries, tell them about, create a mental health plan. You know, like I've done this with a lot of my friends. It's like, sometimes I have my, you know, I go in through my anxiety or depressive states and I know what I need. So when I contact my friends, I say, I'm in this space, and they know what they can do for me to help, because there's a document that exists that says, when I don't talk to you, when I don't bathe for 5 days, when I don't do this, this is how you can help me. And I don't have to verbalize it in the moment that I am like feeling like I want to die, you know? And so this is a forward thinking, and this is a part of the healing too. It's like, we have to learn how to not just survive in the moment, because we're motherfucking survivors. We're all survivors. Not to survive in the moment, but also think about preparing for stuff. So, and that's a part of taking care of ourselves, which is the hardest thing, right? Because to think about it ahead of time is to think about yourself and your self-care. And sometimes it's hard to get to that place when somebody has been abusing you and making you feel like you're worthless, right? Or that you don't have anybody. So that's a lot of work. So community healing, I'm just like all for that. And I know how difficult it is, because we have to share the most vulnerable parts of ourselves. But just think about the ramifications when we don't. This is so much greater when we don't share ourselves. And I strongly believe that every movement needs to be talking about sexual violence, and even specifically child sexual abuse. I believe that all organizations should have support for survivors, because in every business, every university, every, whatever you want to say, the whole world, there are survivors. People are struggling every day just to show up, get out of bed. How to communicate with people, how to even have, when we think about boundaries, we only think about them in the context of our romantic relationships, but these are boundaries even with work. If you don't have boundaries in your own, you know, with your own self and with other people that you love, it's going to be even harder to go to a work environment and create boundaries and negotiate with the people you work with. So this ripples throughout our lives. It's not just our sex lives. You know, as we often say, CSA is not a childhood issue, it's a lifelong issue. And domestic violence, intimate partner violence should be everybody's issue. Because when we see things, we need to help people, we need to support people, give them information. And this is the piece about community, and I'm gonna bring it up. You know, living in a capitalist society, we are told to like just have, you know, like it's about us. Find your family, have children, and, you know, have the American dream and stuff. And what I love is that as queers, we challenge that shit all the time. We have really created beautiful ways of how to love each other, how to have community, and how to have family. Now we got to go the extra step. And we really got to think about how sexual violence, especially as queer and trans people, sexual violence is just pretty much implicit in our lives, because people wonder about what's between our legs, how we have sex. Everything towards us is sexual. Everyone makes it sexual. So in and of itself, it is sexually violent to actually even exist as a queer person in this world in a mainstream cis het society. You know, so I believe that all movements, all organizations actually have to create programming that does support survivors. They need to support survivors. They need to have it in their budget to, so if it is possible, support the families as well, whatever that could look like, because that ripples into everyday life, every part of society. And if we don't grapple with the things, especially that begin in childhood, it'll never get fixed. It will never get fixed. We have to go back to those moments. Sorry. We have to go back to those moments of trauma. You know, Aredvi and I talk about this all the time. It's like, I truly believe that as adults, most people, maybe all people that are struggling with some sort of trauma, it is based in their childhood. It is based in their childhood, whether it is neglect from people, one thing that happened that affected the rest of your life, or a consistent building upon of something. Many people that have, like, I have abandonment issues because a parent left. I have issues with trust because I was sexually abused when I was a child. I have, you know, and so when I talk about the trajectory part of, like, if you're a survivor of CSA, there is a possibility that you could be blah, blah, blah. And I want to be clear about that piece. It's not because that person is a survivor, not at all. The reason why the trajectory happens is because we haven't addressed everything that we're talking about right now. Just because the abuse stopped doesn't mean that there is nothing that needs to be worked on. Like, trust has been completely damaged. What are boundaries? The person that's supposed to love me the most just did this horrible thing to me. So what is friendship? What is love? What, you are completely, you know, like, confused about that. So it makes sense that when you get older, either a harm doer will notice that in you, because they're good at noticing those things. They're good at grooming and finding people who have been harmed, who need love, who need care. And they jump on that and they use it. So to me, it's not because the person, you know, like, you got abused and now all this shit's gonna happen. It's because of the way perpetrators or harm doers work. And it's like, I need this love and care and stuff. And they're like, oh, easy target, right? Because this person probably hasn't had the love, skill, resources, and tools to understand that that thing that happened didn't just stay there. It's still with you. And most of us realize that when we're freaking adults already, and we've had so many bad relationships, and then we're thinking back and saying, oh, yeah. So that, I wanted to be clear about the trajectory, because a lot, you know, I wanted to be like, it is others, not because of what happened to the person, but it is others that contribute to that trajectory.
Yeah, Ignacio, thank you so much for that. Thank you so much for, like, explaining the trajectory, for explaining, like, different aspects of how, like, trauma that you experience when you're a child really impacts the way that you see yourself as an adult, you know, and see your own power, you know, expressed in, like, relationships. When talking about support, right? When talking about how we can, like, support survivors, that part, what you just said, really sticks with me. You know, the how abusers know how to groom, you know, for folks that they can abuse, you know. So that, to me, is another part, I guess, of, like, supporting survivors, making sure that abusers are called out. You know, making sure that we see them, that we know that we see them, and that what they're doing is unacceptable. And that ties into, for me, how, you know, especially with our communities, because of our identities, we're already at so much risk, you know, and at so much risk of harm from other people, that how we are complacent about, not us, I mean, society as a whole is complacent about homophobia, biphobia, transphobia, really sends a message to folks who want to abuse that it's okay for you to treat people that way. You know, not only is it okay, we'll reward you for it. We'll condone you for it. You're not going to lose your job for it. You're not going to lose money for it. You'll get elected to high government positions. That's okay. You know, it's okay if you do that. So for me, and it goes hand in hand with what you're saying, right? The work that survivors do and the support that they receive from programs like yours, and also like us calling out these systems of oppression and making sure that they can't thrive. One of the things, and I think you mentioned it, Ignacio, was that like you tried to reach out for support from a support group, right? When you were going through a really tough time, and they were some kind of phobic. They discriminated against you, right? Because of the way that you looked, because of their assumed gender of you. We see that a lot too with our survivors, you know, with survivors who are trying to get some sort of like emergency housing at a shelter, but can't because that's a woman's shelter. You know, we hear survivors calling us and being like, I tried to call a shelter and see if they would give me space, but once they found out I'm a trans woman, then they started asking questions about whether I've had the surgery or not, or because of the tone of my voice, assume that I was something that I'm not, you know? And not only from DV shelters, like we tell folks to ask for help, right? And these systems that are supposed to help people really fail us. Like we grow up saying like, if you're ever in danger, call 911, but how do our Black survivors feel about that, right? There's the very real risk and chance that if a Black survivor calls for help, they're gonna be murdered by police. You know, and we see that in the news all the time now. And when we take into account Black survivors and like sexual orientation and gender identity, we see that the risk is higher for Black trans women, you know? So as we're supporting survivors and asking for help, you know, it's the responsibility of folks also to meet them halfway. If you're asking me to ask for help, then make sure that that help that you're offering me is going to be suitable to my needs and that you're not going to discriminate against me when I'm asking for help. So that's something that popped up, and it ties into community healing, right? You know, which is like really important.
Yeah, thank you. I keep saying what a wonderful conversation. It's just too bad we don't have all the time. So many, I'm thinking about so many aspects of this specific to queer trans relationships, again, of all kinds, not just romantic relationships, even within community. I think one thing I've noticed is in general, we live in a culture that there's also a hierarchy of physical violence, like physical violence and then sexual violence of a certain type over emotional violence. And those are all tied in together, right? Like sexual violence often comes with emotional violence, emotional abuse, especially in the context of domestic violence. So like the way we are taught to look at it is, to me, it's so backwards. Like we are almost groomed by society to see signs of abuse in intimate partnerships as endearing, romantic. We were just talking about how like stalking is like it's seen as, oh my gosh, the more you're stalk and you're creepy, it means your love is more real. Like, what is that? Why are we letting our children watch this kind of media? Why are we okay with this? So it's like we are living, like I like what you said, Erica, it's like we live in a culture that is like the more abusive and toxic you are, the more opportunities you get, the more charming people think you are, the more, you know, it's like, oh, that's assertiveness. It's like we are at the level right now, we don't even, we don't have these skills. From children to adults, to even be able to identify for ourselves or others what is toxic, what is just not okay. Like, I don't care like who you are. If you're dismissing my feelings, That is not okay. That needs to be addressed right away, right here, right now. You can't that's a sign, that's a red flag, right? Things like, if you're crossing my boundaries, that is not okay. It doesn't matter that you have a PhD, I don't care. Like, so there's just going again, there's a lot of pressure to go against that, right? So I want to go back to that idea of consent also, that what the very beginning, talking about how violence and abuse is always non-consensual. What I'm always amazed by is that, first of all, I think we have finally done a decent job of talking about consent within sexual relationships, right? We try to tell ourselves and young people, anytime, you know, it doesn't matter if you already consented to sex, you're going in it at any time, you change your mind for any reason, it's okay, you say no, or you just even hesitant, you're cool, you don't even have to provide a reason for why you don't want to do it. And on the other side, we're like, you know, if someone is hesitant and doesn't want to do it, out. We don't have to talk more about this. Cool, great. I'm really happy as a society, we are okay with this. Hopefully, at least in some communities, we've got this down. So why not apply this concept to relationships as well? Why not talk about it in that? Why is it that when it comes to relationships, we feel like, oh, you know what? I don't know if it's me or the other person. This shit isn't working. I'm miserable. I'm constantly stressed. I'm constantly walking on eggshells. Because a lot of times, I feel like for folks, especially marginalized folks, queer trans folks, to get from the place of I'm really not feeling great about this relationship to, oh my gosh, I'm in a toxic relationship. Oh my gosh, I'm in an abusive relationship. That might be just a lot for a lot of people to get there. But why do we need to get there? My question is that why can't we just apply the same consent principles to relationships? If it's not working for you, take a pause. You don't have to even end it. Take a pause. See what's happening here, right? But again, with relationships, because another pressure is that we measure the success of a relationship first and foremost by how long we've been together. As if somehow that says anything about the quality of the relationship, anything. So anyways, those are some of my thoughts around just like how these ideas of consent boundaries and how as a society not having the skills to really respond to these patterns, right, we suffer from.
Oh, you just brought up some good stuff. So it is, to me, there's this thing about either the hyper focus on sex or the elimination of sex. So we hyper focus on sex when we talk specifically about consent. You know, like you can consent to say no, you can change your mind. We talk specifically about sex when we talk about pleasure, sexual liberation. We focus on the actual mechanics of sex as those things. Which it could be so much more. Sexual liberation, as I said before, is like, sexual liberation to me is like if you couldn't look at yourself naked in the mirror one day and now you could, that's sexual liberation. You know, like that's what it is. Whatever it is for you, that is sexual liberation. It doesn't have to be, I could actually have sex or something, right? And so when we think about abuse, which this is the funny part to me, we're talking about sexual abuse, child sexual abuse. We're talking about sexual violence. You see, sex is all up in that, but we do not concentrate on the sex that is completely altered, shifted, and changed, right? Like how people in those situations later on about and concerning bodies and their bodies and how they share those bodies or how they in their own bodies, we don't address those things. In fact, we only focus on ending the thing. That's it. With child sexual abuse, it's like, okay, get the child out of the house, or if that's even the thing, now it's good. Now maybe a couple years of therapy, great. Okay, we got it, right? Because we stopped the action. The action alone is not the thing. And it's like this hyper-focus on non-focus on sex is a problem. Our problem in this country around sex education or holistic sexuality is like horrible. I think it's just horrific. We know nothing about sex, sexuality, and relationship building and connection with folks. And something that we all talk about, like having this, we all experience this thing when we were young. Somebody says something to us or does something, and we're like, what was that, right? Our gut. And when I was raising my daughter, I was always like, you trust your fucking gut. I don't care if you think you're crazy for it. I don't care. I don't care. Trust your gut. When your gut tells you something, you go with it. you know, because to me, that is, people call it their gut. Some people call it their sixth sense. Other people call it spirit. Some people say these are our ancestors talking to us. However you get those messages, I believe that we don't trust our own selves. And this is a part of our own emotional maturity, which we do not have. Emotional maturity is a huge part of connecting with people, about knowing yourself and really digging into you before you can be with another. And the way we build relationships in this society is two people melding into one. It is a loss of self completely. And what we try to say is it is not a loss of self. It is a digging into yourself, getting into you so deeply and so profoundly that you know yourself so well that you can actually explain and express to other people exactly what you want, because you know, you already been there. You don't have to wait for another person to figure this out for you, because this is the way we've constructed love and connection. It is love at first sight. You know, when you meet the right person, it is forever, all these things. And for some people, that might be the case. Yes, I'm not going to deny that. But for the majority of us, hell no. That is not how love works. That is not how communication works. How we do it is through trial and error, trial and error, trial and error, until maybe we're 50 or 60 and we finally get it. And I want to change that. I want to know that we understand ourselves earlier, trusting our gut, understanding sex, questioning people, asking our friends, is that right or wrong? Having accountability buddies, like community, just making it all community, because the conversation of sex should not be private. It should be beautiful and big and bold. If it were, you couldn't take it and make it a secret. You couldn't. We would notice the grooming. We would notice it, because if we were in a society that talked about sex and sexuality and gender with an openness and a curiosity, we would see and understand these things a lot differently.
Yeah, there's a lot to think there, Ignacio, about how we talk about love and sex. Yeah, that's very real. I think we do have a very narrow way of talking about love and sex, even though I feel like, you know, it affects many aspects of our lives. One thing that popped out for me while you were talking, and I think Aredvi, you also mentioned it, was how smaller communities are. You know, so that even if we wanted to talk about sex or relationships, because of like the discrimination that already exists against our communities, there's only very few people that you can talk to about that. I'm in Boston, so the queer community here is really small. Sometimes I feel like I go to one queer event and then I go to another, I see the same like 8-10 people there. So how we see that, well, how I see that reflected in our work too with like survivors of partner abuse, is that it makes it hard, I think, and I think y'all mentioned this already, it makes it hard for someone to leave a relationship. You know, you have that, like this idea of the ride or die, you know, and this idea of like U-hauling, you know, in our communities, this like extreme, I guess because our communities are so small and because there's not that many people that you can talk to about your experiences, it makes it harder sometimes to, like, if you've committed a certain amount of time in a relationship, to leave that relationship. And we've also seen that survivors too also share the same friends, that they have friends in common with their abusers. And so if they're thinking about leaving a relationship where abuse is happening, they also have to consider, if I leave this relationship, am I going to leave my community behind as well? Does that mean that I'm not going to have friends outside once I tell folks that this is what happened, that this is what Sam or Alex did? Am I going to lose those friends too? So that's like a second loss of family if you have a family who isn't accepting of your identities. That's like taking it a step further.
Yeah, and we didn't even mention, but I'll just put it out there, like that's even like probably tripled and quadrupled when you're thinking about a person who is disabled and their partner is their helper and their provider, their access person. That is a fucking very difficult situation when this person is the one that's helping you with your medication, helping you get around, helping you do that. That is complicated. And that's why when you first started and said, we don't deny people service if they're still in the relationship, because it makes sense, because not everybody has the privilege to do that. No, sometimes it's not possible. And this is where I think in our community, we're so good at coming up with crafty, creative ideas of how to support people. And that's why I keep saying, well, let's keep on pushing our community to come up with some pretty creative ideas about how we deal with this and how we talk about relationship, sex, and connection with one another. It's like it's time to push the next level of this.
Yeah, thank you. Unfortunately, we don't have a lot of time, so I just want to leave with this more of a positive thing for myself that I've come to, is that as a survivor, I oftentimes like to think about where I am as having a superpower. You know, I've become so sensitive to certain behaviors that I can spot it from 2 miles away. And I also acknowledge that it's not so much about, okay, am I right or wrong? Is that, like you're saying, the gut feeling is telling me something. I've been through this enough times. I can't risk this. I can't risk, like, in a new relationship that's starting with dismissing me. I can't even risk that. I'm not even going to go there. And that has saved me a lot of, like, I really think of it as a superpower. I'm like, oh my gosh, I've been through so much, and now I'm so good at my boundaries. And that doesn't mean this doesn't happen to me. It doesn't mean I don't also, like, find myself in certain situations where I look at it. But I can tell you that having that awareness and that intention has changed things, so that instead of staying in something for years, maybe now it's like months, maybe it's weeks. And I'm okay with that. I'm going to keep with that. And on that note, I just want to say that thank you so much for joining us for this panel. We are the HEAL Project. You can find us on social media at HEAL to End. That's HEAL, HEAL number 2. END, and our website is healtoend.org. And Erica, would you like to introduce?
Yeah, I'm really happy to have been on this panel with y'all, to have shared space with y'all and learn more about the work that you do. You can follow the Network Loretta at our website, which is tnlr.org, so short and sweet. We're also on Facebook and on Twitter, and you just put in the name of our organization without the backward slash, so it's the Network Loretta. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.